1, 2, 3. Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 4 of Devtoberfest 2023. I'm Sheena, and I'm a developer advocate at SAP. This is week 4 of ABAP CAP sessions, and I hope all of you enjoyed and took part in the contest last week. The topic for today is Cloud API Enablement on SAP S4HANA and SAP S4HANA Cloud Private Editions. Before we begin, I would like to remind our participants to join the Devtoberfest group in the SAP community so that you can participate in the contest and be able to qualify for a grand prize, which is an all-expense paid trip to SAP's Newport Beach office in California. A link to the Devtoberfest tutorial for this session will be added in the description box and the chat soon after the session. I would now like to invite our speakers for today, Alexander Rother and Kai Deman from SAP, to introduce themselves and start today's session. Over to you, Alexander and Kai.
All right, thank you very much, Sheena. So first, let me share the screen. I think now you should be able to see it. And I will also take the pointer. All right, so hello everyone also from my side. My name is Alexander Rother, and in the room right behind that wall, I have Kai Deman sitting, and we are very happy to have a session with you around Cloud API Enablement Guidelines for S4HANA Cloud Private Edition and on-premise. So to start with, first, a quick look at the agenda. I will set the scene with a quick recap of ABAP Cloud and the 3-tier extensibility model. If you're not familiar with that, this is a very quick, brief introduction. And then, of course, the major part of this session is all around the Tier 2 guidelines, so everything around Cloud API enablement. And then the second half is taken by Kai with a demo so that you can all really see in the system how that looks like. So not only theory, but you can really see how it works in practice. Okay, so let's get started with ABAP Cloud and the 3-tier extensibility model. So first of all, what is ABAP Cloud? ABAP Cloud is our cloud development model to build cloud-ready business applications, services, and extensions. The good thing is that ABAP Cloud is available in any S4 edition, be it on-premise, be it in the private cloud, or also in the public cloud, and even on BTP ABAP environment. So it's available everywhere. And the second good thing is that it combines the transactional programming domain, the analytical domain, and also all integration capabilities are on board this development model. So if you want to know more about ABAP Cloud and all the details regarding that, please have a look at all the other Devtoberfest sessions, and you can find many more details around that. So in this session now, we will focus here on the left-hand side on S4 on-premise and S4 Cloud Private Edition. Why that? Well, as you can see here, we still have the classic ABAP development model around. And so here we have the question, how shall you manage the coexistence of the two development models? Okay, probably you even have many classic extensions already. So how do you now introduce modern ABAP Cloud coding? Okay, and this is basically the idea of this session. So our idea behind combining ABAP Cloud and the classic extensibility techniques is the 3-tier extensibility model for S4 Private Edition and on-premise. And I will give a very brief introduction here. So on the left-hand side, you can see the S4 stack. In the middle, we have the BTP, and on the right-hand side, some explanations. So first, we start with the first tier of the 3-tier extensibility model. The first tier is pure cloud extensibility. This is exactly the same as you would have in the public cloud, and is also as strict as in the public cloud. Okay, so if you develop here on the left-hand side inside the S4 system, then of course you would use ABAP Cloud. And on the right-hand side on BTP, you would use either Java, Node.js, or ABAP Cloud. So you have the free choice. And everything you develop here is cloud ready and is upgrade stable. And of course, this should be the default for anything newly developed. Then we have the second tier. Tier 2, that's the Cloud API Enablement layer. So probably you are familiar with ABAP Cloud already a little bit, and you know that one of the key aspects of ABAP Cloud is that you must use only released SAP APIs. Okay, so now the question arises. Imagine you develop something in tier 1, and then you recognize that an API is missing for your development. So the SAP API is not released yet. So what shall you do? And the answer is tier 2. Because in tier 2, you can mitigate the missing of that API with an own Cloud API enablement. And the idea is basically that you create a wrapper around the non-released SAP object, then you release the wrapper for ABAP Cloud, and by that it becomes accessible in tier 1. And then of course we have tier 3. Tier 3 contains all the classic ABAP development. So basically all your existing legacy logic, your custom code ends up here. So if you have a migration towards S4 and you are in the brownfield, of course you have much coding in here already probably. And the idea is, of course, when you transform towards S4, you should try to retire as much as possible of that code if it's not used anymore. Then if there is a business case, of course, you can renovate this scenario and innovate it towards tier 1. So that means either ABAP Cloud or on BTP. Or what, of course, you can also do, and what is recommended is to adapt the code to make it at least a bit more upgrade stable. So for example, move away from modifications, use bodies, and so on. Okay, so this is the overview of the 3 tiers. And now I would like to highlight the interplay of those 3 tiers inside your system a little bit more. And I will develop a picture together with you now. So first, once again, let's start with tier 1. Tier 1, as I explained, is the pure cloud extensibility model. And inside the system, this means this is ABAP Cloud. And in tier 1, you are forced to use ABAP Cloud via syntax check. So there's no possibility to evade that. That means if you want to talk to SAP development objects, you must only use the public SAP interfaces. And these are the released SAP development objects. Okay, so these are the only ones you can access. There's no direct access to any other development object. And now comes the situation I explained before. You want to access a development object that is not part of the public interface. So what can you do? Now tier 2 comes into the game, because in tier 2, you develop using standard ABAP. So that's the classic ABAP development model you use for tier 2 for the wrappers. And there you are allowed to access a non-released development object. Okay, so what you do in tier 2 is you create a wrapper around the non-released development object, and then you release your own wrapper for cloud development, and thereby it becomes accessible from tier 1. And this access then is, of course, once again, ABAP Cloud conform. That one is not, but this one is. Okay. And the good thing is that we have ABAP test cockpit checks around to make sure that you have control over these usages and also over the development of the wrapper itself. Now, of course, we have tier 3 as well. And I told you all your existing extensions, they will end up in tier 3. And this is basically what I call old objects. So these are the extensions you already developed for DynPro extensions and so on. They are part of tier 3. They end up here. And of course, they have been developed long before ABAP Cloud was around. So it does not make sense to put the rules of ABAP Cloud upon them afterwards without a real business scenario. So you would take those objects here and still keep the uncontrolled access to the SAP development objects. And only if there is a business case, you would renovate those. And now imagine there's one further case I want to explain. Imagine you want to create an extension to an SAP application that is still based on SAP GUI. So you need to make a DynPro extension, right? Then you will never be able to do that in tier 1 because SAP GUI and the DynPro programming model is just not part of tier 1, right? You cannot use it here. In this case, you're forced to do it in tier 3. And that means that even in tier 3, it might be required to create new objects, for example, for a DINPRO extension. But then our guidance is that even in that case, where you use the classic ABAP development model, even in that case, try to do it as ABAP Cloud conform as possible. And that means also use your custom wrappers and also use the public SAP APIs wherever possible. And only if that doesn't work out, then of course you can also access non-released SAP development objects. And also for the development of these objects themselves, we have once again ABAP Test Cockpit checks around that help you to develop them in an ABAP Cloud conform way. All right, so this is the 3-tier model, and this was everything around the recap. So now let's move on to the tier 2 guidelines. How shall you develop those wrappers? Okay, first, I will just explain a few cornerstones of the setup of tier 2, right? Because you have to have a correct setup in the system so that everything regarding developing those wrappers works properly. The first important thing is that your wrappers, your tier 2 development must be in a software component with ABAP language version standard ABAP. I also told you already why this is the case. In your wrappers, you want to have access to the non-released SAP development objects. And that is not possible if you use ABAP Cloud, because that's cloud ready, and there, of course, it must not be possible. So if you want to develop wrappers around non-released SAP objects, it must be standard ABAP, because there you have this access. Then I also told already that we have the ABAP Test Cockpit with corresponding checks around, so that you can enforce ABAP Cloud rules even on your wrappers developed in the classic ABAP development model. So that means you develop those wrappers as ABAP Cloud compliant as possible, and you only grant ATC exemptions for the desired violations. What are those desired violations? Well, of course, the access to the non-released development objects, because this is exactly the purpose of those wrappers and of tier 2. And this is very important because by that, you have basically a list, all the exemptions, they form a list of the non-ABAP Cloud conform access to SAP development objects. And that's important to have a governance on. All right, and then last but not least, we of course have also authorizations around that are required for a tier 2 developer. And the guideline is that you start with the ABAP Cloud developer role template. There you have all the authorizations included that you need for cloud development. And then, because we're developing in standard ABAP, you just add the authorization for standard ABAP. And so this would be the starting point for tier 2 development. Okay, now we have understood the setup. So how does now work building wrappers in principle? So here we have the layering once again. We have the non-released SAP development objects at the bottom. Then in the middle, we have tier 2 and then tier 1 on top. And this is basically where you want to use those non-released development objects. Okay, how does it now work? The first step is that you create a wrapper object in tier 2. The second step is that you implement this wrapper, and in the implementation, you make access to the non-released SAP development object. And the third and final step is you release your wrapper object for the use in cloud development. And with that release, this wrapper here becomes accessible from tier 1. And thereby, indirectly from tier 1, you can use the non-released SAP development object. Okay, now once again, for tier 2, we have around the ABAP Test Cockpit, and you can enforce ABAP Cloud rules. So this wrapper you develop here is also ABAP Cloud compliant besides the access of the non-released development object. And with the exemptions you need to grant for this access here, you have the possibility for a governance, because you really have the list of those non-ABAP Cloud compliant accesses. And having that said, of course, it's clear that here with tier 2, you now have a clear custom interface between the SAP code and your tier 1 development. Okay, now we have understood how building wrappers works. So now let's see what kind of objects shall actually be wrapped. Here we have a table. On the left-hand side, we have the object type that should be wrapped. And on the right-hand side, what kind of object type we recommend for wrapping that one. The first line is a wrap BO. A wrap BO is a modern business object programmed using the ABAP RESTful programming model. And with the entity manipulation language that is also around for that, a wrap BO also serves as an API. And because it's a very modern one, and it's of course also in the modern scope of S4, then this is a good API to use. And we recommend to wrap that wrap BO using a class and interface. And in the implementation, of course, you access the wrap BO using the entity manipulation language. The second and third object types to be wrapped are either a function module or a class and interface. And for wrapping that, you would also use class and interface, so an object-oriented wrapper. And the wrapping of a function module with a class and interface, that will be shown by Kai in the demo later on. Then, of course, if some data access API is missing, so a CDS view is not released yet, or there's even a table that has no CDS view at all, and you need that data, then what can you do? Of course, you can also wrap that. You can wrap a CDS view, and if required, the corresponding DCL, and also an SAP table can be wrapped for data access. You do that using a CDS view and a DCL if required. At the moment, we do not recommend to wrap other object types, but of course that list is continuously reviewed, and we also check for other object types that might be relevant. And so there might be updates in the future, but at the moment, this is the set of recommendations. Okay, now we have one further mitigation possibility in tier 2. Imagine you're developing in tier 1 and you are implementing an ABAP managed database procedure, so an AMDP. And there, for example, you want to access application function libraries, or you need write access to some entities and so on. Okay. Then you realize that this is not possible at the moment. At the moment, in ABAP Cloud, in tier 1, ABAP managed database procedures are restricted to read-only access. So what can you do then? The mitigation is also possible using tier 2, but it's slightly different than just a pure wrapper. Because here, for mitigating the features in AMDP, you would create an object in tier 2 that corresponds to the desired usage in tier 1. And then you release the corresponding artifact. So how does it work? Imagine you want to use a CDS table function in tier 1 and make use of complex features in HANA in the implementation. Then the mitigation would work as follows. You would create the CDS table function and its implementation in tier 2. You would create a CDS view on top of that table function and then release the CDS view. And by that, it becomes accessible from tier 1. If you need a pure AMDP method, then you create the class and the implementation of the AMDP in tier 2, and you release the class for cloud development. Okay, now you know the mitigation possibilities that we offer using tier 2, and you also know the setup and the governance, ABAP test cockpit features, and so on. So now I would like to directly answer some frequently asked questions, because they really come up very frequently, and they are also very important points. So the first thing is, what about dictionary artifacts? Shall dictionary artifacts also be wrapped in tier 2? And the answer is no. Our guideline, our recommendation is that you try to decouple from the dictionary artifacts in your code objects, because there you can use local type declarations, which we will also use, for example, in the wrapper classes and interfaces. We will also use local types. And you can also, for example, use fields of a released CDS view to type your variables in ABAP code. And by that, I think in ABAP code, you have many possibilities to really decouple from the dictionary artifacts for typing variables. However, if you want to develop dictionary artifacts in tier 1, there, of course, you must use dictionary artifacts. If you want to create a table, for example, and you need the types for the different fields, then, of course, you're forced to either use the released SAP artifacts, or you need to create your own dictionary artifacts in tier 1. The second question that comes around very frequently is around bodies. And the question is, can I wrap non-released bodies in tier 2? And the answer to that is no, nothing needs to be done regarding bodies in tier 2. Either the bodies are released for cloud development, and then you implement them in tier 1 using ABAP Cloud, or they are not released, and then you implement them in tier 3 in classic ABAP. But there's no wrapper around a body or anything similar required. The third question is regarding stability of the wrappers. Of course, when you develop in tier 1 using ABAP Cloud, you're using the public SAP APIs. And we ensure that these public SAP APIs remain upgrade stable. And this is the important thing to decouple your application logic in tier 1 from the SAP code, so that if the SAP code changes in an upgrade, nothing happens to your extensions. They continue to run. And the question is now, of course, if you develop a wrapper in tier 2, then that should also be upgrade stable, because otherwise, again, your tier 1 extension would break. And the question is, how can you ensure that? And the answer is, yes, you can ensure that, because we have checks in the ABAP test cockpit around that are exactly the same ones we use SAP internally. So you can make sure that your wrappers stay as compatible and as consistent as our public SAP APIs. So use those ATC checks to ensure the stability of your wrappers. Then last but not least, what about authorization objects and authorization checks that are done within the wrapped SAP objects? That's also very important. Probably if you are familiar with ABAP Cloud, you know that for all the ABAP Cloud APIs, so for our released SAP development objects, we always have a clean authorization signature. That means it's very clear which authorization objects are required for the API, and these authorization objects are also released for cloud development. Okay, so that's very clean, and you know what kind of authorizations are required. If you now wrap some non-released SAP development objects, of course, it might be that inside that object there are other authorization checks to non-released authorization objects, for example, right? And that means, of course, the wrappers might not have a clean authorization signature, but that's totally okay. We live with that because for building roles, you're used to the transaction PFCG, and there you can enter both the released authorization objects and also the unreleased authorization objects. So with the combination, everything is fine again. All right, so now we have the setup, we know how to build wrappers, we know how to make complex features in AMDPs available, we have some FAQs being answered. And now the last point I would like to explain is the consumption of the wrappers in tier 1. I think the explanation is very easy because the consumption of the wrappers works exactly the same way as the consumption of public SAP interfaces. The reason is it is a development object that is released for cloud development, and there is no difference between the public SAP interface and the tier 2 wrappers in that respect. So also the consumption works exactly the same. Nothing special. Now imagine SAP delivers a replacement for your wrapper because you raised a customer influence request and then SAP answered and delivered that API. Then, of course, you have two possibilities. Either you throw away your wrapper and in your tier 1 development, you directly use the public released SAP interface. Or the other possibility is imagine you have a frequent use of your wrapper in tier 1, so you have multiple usages all around, then it might be suitable to keep a central access to the SAP development. And then you might refactor inside your wrapper in tier 2, keep all the usages in tier 1 stable, and then move the wrapper towards tier 1. So you can change the ABAP language version of the wrapper and move it to tier 1. Okay, I think with that, enough from the theory. And now I would like to hand over to Kai to show you how everything works in the system. Over to you, Kai.
Yes, thank you, Alexander. Hello to everyone. Just let me shortly introduce myself. My name is Kai Demann. I work as a development expert in the ABAP Platform Development Unit. And as a product owner, I'm responsible for the planning and execution of integration tests and the compilation of supplemental documentation like best practices or how-to guides. Now, for the demo, I would like to show you how to create a purchase requisition programmatically from tier 1 using a BAPI that we wrap in tier 2. So now some of you may not be familiar with the purchase requisition business object. So to be on the same state, let me give a short explanation. So the purchase requisition is basically a request to the purchasing organization to procure a certain quantity of materials or services. In our demo, we will request 10 printers for our plant in Walldorf. But before we dig into the code, let me show how this looks like in the corresponding Fiori app. So let's launch the Fiori app. Let's create a purchase requisition. First of all, you see here I have the header. The system by default will choose the document type NB, which means it's a direct procurement. And now I can add some items to my purchase requisition. As I said, for our demo, we want to purchase some materials, printers. So first of all, I have to say for which plant. I already said I want to have it for our plant in Walldorf. I need printers from material group hardware. Account assignment category, I don't know. Yes. Now I have to specify the quantity. Here in this case, I already said I want to have 10 printers. I need them in 2 weeks. So let's put the delivery date in 2 weeks. Now I have to propose a valuation price. I don't need so sophisticated printers. So I think 150 euros should be fine. And this is per piece. And then last but not least, I have to specify the purchasing group that shall deal with this purchasing request. Okay, apply, great. Okay, now we have created the purchase requisition. Let's go back to the list. And you can see this is the purchase requisition that I created. As I said, we want to do this programmatically from tier 1 using the BAPI. So again, before we start with our implementation, let's first of all understand the BAPI. The BAPI is BAPI PR create. It has a structure for the header. As you may remember, the system chose this document type NB automatically, so I also use this here in my code. Additionally, so this is here a structure with some fields. And in the BAPI, I just want to pass this purchase requisition type. So there is a different control structure that just consists of Boolean values. So that's typical for BAPIs that says that in this structure, the purchase requisition type was changed. Then the BAPI offers a test run parameter. This is basically that you can also run this in simulation mode and perform checks. So that would be if the test run is true. If you set it to false, it would really create a purchase requisition. Then it will return a number of the purchase requisition. And of course, you can hand over a list of items. For the items, you then have a number for the line item, so to speak. Again, as we did in the UI, you have to provide the plant. Here, the short text, it's a printer. The material group, that was hardware. The accounting assignment category, which we don't know, unknown. The quantity, I need 10 pieces with a valuation price of 150 euros per piece. The delivery date should be now in 14 days. And the purchasing group is 001. That's the same data that I also entered in the UI in the Fury. As for the header data, it's the same principle for the list of items. Again, for each row of the table, I need to specify which data is to be considered by the function module. So it's a plant, short text, and so on and so forth. Last but not least, the system can return a table of BAPI-RED2 messages. So in case there is a warning, error, whatever. The BAPI does not save the data to the database directly, but uses update tasks. So if you really want that the data is stored on the database table, you have to issue or trigger the update task by calling the commit work. This is, of course, now fine here, since I'm running this in a report in $temp. So here it's fine. Of course, depending on the environment, like if you call this in the RAP context, you would never issue a commit work because this is then done by a framework. All right, so now we are prepared. We have understood how to use the BAPI. Now let's try to create a console application in tier 1. And from the console application, then try to call the BAPI via wrapper. To do so, I have prepared a package for tier 1. And as you can see here, first of all, it inherits from a structure package. And for this package, I have chosen the software component set custom development. This software component is set up in such a way, or set up for ABAP Cloud development. And because I've now chosen this software component for this package, you can see here that the default ABAP language version of the package is ABAP for Cloud development, which means that all objects that I will create in the package must be of type ABAP for Cloud development. So let's create a console application in here. So I create a class, create purchase requisition. Oops, no, I don't want to have the try one. So create purchase requisition. And since it's a console application, I have to implement the IFO class run interface. So I add this to my definition, choose next, choose a transport request, confirm. So now I have a class which implements this interface, and there is a console application. Now let's have a look at the properties. Here in the general section of the properties, you see the ABAP language version of this class. And as I already mentioned, I created this in a package which has default ABAP for Cloud development. So also here, the ABAP language is now correctly ABAP for Cloud development. So what will happen now if we try to call the BAPI? Create. We will get an error message. Namely, first of all, it will say that the use is not permitted. Why is the use not permitted? It's not released for ABAP Cloud development. In this case, actually, we would be lucky, because this error message already indicates that there is a released alternative, namely the business object interface I purchase requisition TP. Now for the demo, as I said, we want to see how what you would do in a situation where this is such a released successor or alternative is not available. So for the moment, we will assume that the second part of the error message didn't appear. So we were told that we should not use or cannot use the BAPI in our ABAP Cloud code. So therefore, we need to create a wrapper. The wrapper shall be in tier 2. So also for tier 2, I already prepared a package. Now, very important, here as a software component, I choose the software component home, as you may, or hopefully I used to, because that you also may have used in the past for your classic development. And here, the default ABAP language version is standard ABAP. Yeah, which means in principle here I can program whatever I'm used to. And first thing that I will do is now, since I want to wrap this via interface in a class, I first of all create an interface and then do the implementation in the class. The good thing about this is that later on, since I'm running against the interface, I can easily also exchange the implementation. So let's create the interface. Purchase requisition. This is interface for wrapper. Okay. Come on. Okay, again, let's choose a transport request. All right. Yeah, so at the end, I want to have a method that calls the API. Yeah, so we have to, in this interface, to define the method. But also, as Alexander mentioned, the API has some structures and data elements that it uses. So also this we need to release via this or provide via this interface. So I would like to have a little boost. So I go here to the API again. I press F2 and have a look at the signature. I now pick the first two parameters, the header and the control structure for the header. And let's start with that. So I want to have a method. Let's call it create purchase requisition, or just create. We want to export the header. And we want to export the control structure. All right. Yeah, but these types, these structures are now not released. Yeah. So what can I do? So I can add here types and define now here these as types. So I can have here my local type for the header and for the control structure. And these shall be of the type of the API structures. And here I will now use my types that I have defined in the interface. Oh, there's a typo. Let's fix that. All right. So, yeah, so what I've done so far is I have defined the method. Oh, sorry, that should be importing, of course. Yeah, so it will take the header and the control structure, and the types are those that I have defined in my interface. Now, when I do so, I would, of course, expose the entire structure. Let's have a look again. Quite some fields, but in our example, or in our scenario, we are actually just needing this purchase requisition type. Yeah. So, and I would like to keep the dependency as small as possible. So I don't want to expose the entire structure, but just the type that I need. Therefore, I will create a structure and just expose the PR type, which is then the type of this structure of TS PR header. Yeah. And thereby, I will not expose the entire structure, but only the type. I do the same with the control structure of PR type. And here I know this is an ABAP Boolean. Yeah, so this is all character 1. So I would here already put this to ABAP Bool and then say end of header X. All right. So now I have limited the access to the type that I need and don't expose the entire structure. Of course, I now should and will proceed with the other types that are needed. But in order to save time, I already prepared this. Yeah. So you see here, I have the header, which exposes the type. I have here now a structure for the items that just expose those fields of the item structure that I need, like the plant, the short text for the printer, yeah, the accounting assignment category, the quantity, and so on and so forth. The same with this simulation parameter, the number, the list of items, the control structure for the list of items, and the list of API messages. And of course, I extended also here the method accordingly. All right, let's check the syntax, it's fine. Let's activate, also fine. All right, so first thing done, I have now an interface. Now I need the implementation. So let's create the ABAP class. Would be set KD, purchase requisition, implementation of wrapper. And of course, I want to implement the interface that I just created. Requisition. Oh, sorry. I have. Wait, whoops, sorry. Here we go. All right, so I have the method create and I need to implement it. Again, here to save some time, I already prepared the call to the, oops, sorry, wrong one, to the BAPI. So this is familiar to you, yeah? So we call the BAPI. Here we need to provide the actual header structure of the BAPI. So I declare this here. Same is for the control structure. I declare this for the items as well. And then I take the importing parameter that I have simplified. Yeah, I see here the importing parameters are those of that I've defined in the interface. So I do a move corresponding to move this to the larger structures. And I can activate. All right, that's the implementation. Now I could, of course, create instances of this implementation direct. But as I already said, in order to be able also be prepared for the refactoring, I prefer to have a factory class that creates the instances and that only the factory class is used so that I later on can simply or could simply exchange the implementation. So therefore, let's create another class. So it is rep factory for wrapper. Yeah, and in the public section, I would now create a static method. Let's call it create instance. And this should return the value of the instance. And as I said, I want to abstract from my implementation, so it will not give me a type of my class, but of my interface. Oh, sorry. Now, where did I put my issue?
The 2 is missing. Sorry, Kai. Type ref 2.
Oh, sorry.
Type ref 2. Then
Thank you. Thank you. Right. So now I get here some warning that the implementation is missing. Of course, now I use the quick fix also to add implementation. And the implementation is quite easy. Basically, since this is just a factory, I will create now an instance of my class ZKD-PR. Oh, did I implement the wrong interface? Sorry. I did a typo here. I had some try runs, so I had another interface in the system, but I didn't want to use that one, so I apologize. So let's fix this quickly. That happens live. I'm sorry for that. So now again, let's check syntax. Now everything is fine. Perfect. All right. Okay. So we have the interface, we have the wrapper, we have the factory. Now let's go back again to tier 1 and try to consume it. Also here, I prepared some code to call the wrapper. Yeah. So we would call the factory to create an instance. Yeah. So we then get the instance of our wrapper and then call the create method on this wrapper. But as you can see, What is again the problem here? The use of class is not permitted. Yes, that's what I want to see. Yeah, because I mean, basically compared to the BAPI, nothing has changed. Yeah, we have now here a class which is in standard ABAP, but of course, yet we haven't released this. Yeah, so it's correct here that I get now this error message that the use of this class is not permitted. We also can have a look here. Maybe that's good in the long text. Yeah, and again, there's an ABAP for cloud development. I need to consume an API that's released for cloud development. Okay, so then let's do it. Okay, so which two objects do we consume? We, on the one hand side, have the interface. Yeah, so let's close that one. So we need to release the interface. Therefore, I again go to the Properties tab. Here we have this API state. And here you can see that I can release it for a system internal use for the so-called C1 contract. And this is not set yet. So I can say, yes, I want to add it. Again, it will tell me here, okay, do you want for the interface, I have RepR, release it for system internal use? Yes, I want to release it for use in cloud development. Perfect. Next. Finish. All right, and now you can see here that it has been released for system internal use for use in cloud development. All right, but since besides the interface, we also use the factory. So let's also release the factory. Same procedure. Next. Okay, now I get a warning. I get, as Alexander said, for this entire story, like with the ATC checks and checking consistency and compatibility for released APIs, the same checks apply in your custom system as they do with SAP internally. Yeah, and here at SAP internally, this instance creation should be private. Okay, so then let's do that instead of having here public creation, so that you could also create an instance of the class outside the code. Yeah, that should only be done via the create instance. So let's set this to private. Right. Now let's try again. Release it. No warning. Fine. Perfect. Select the transport request. Finish. So we have released the interface. We have released the factory. So let's go back to our console application in tier 1. And let's check syntax again. Nice. All right. So let's activate. And now let's run the console application. So again here, when it's like for the BAPI, we call the wrapper with the create. We don't set the simulation mode to false. Yeah, so we want to create a real purchase requisition. For the header, it's again the purchase requisition type NB for direct procurement. We have the control structure. We have here our 10 printers. Yeah, so it's the same, but we're not calling the BAPI, but we are calling the create method of our wrapper. So let's execute it. Yeah, and we can now get a success message that the purchase requisition 1419 got created. So let's go back to the Fiori app. The 18 was that we created at the beginning. Yeah, and you see now I have here this 19, so work well, fine. Yeah, and I have here my 10 printers for a valuation price of 150 euros. All right, so yeah. Now let's quickly. Yes.
Kai, I think we are short on time already. I think you showed a perfect round trip of everything regarding wrapping, right? From the Fiori app, then you explained how everything works.
Yeah.
You created
let me quickly just do one more thing. This is running the ATC, and then I'm done. Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, because now, as Alexander said, here my wrapper implementation and my interface are using unreleased APIs. Oops, sorry, back. So nah. So for instance, I use here my interface, or my class uses here this BAPI structure, or my interface uses here this BAPI structure. My class, it calls the BAPI PR create. Yeah, of course, this is known, this is on purpose. Yeah, and in order to have now the governance, I can or need to request the exemption. So here I would say, okay, I would like to apply the exemption for the class. Now, to keep it simple, I would say for any kind of this check usage of released API, I want to be exempted. And the reason, I can specify the reason, API enablement for tier 1. And then I can send this. I also need to do this the same with the interface. I will now keep this short that we have time for questions and answers, but that would be the same. Or maybe we just do it, it's really quick. Also here for the interface, apply the exemption to the check for released APIs. And then API enablement. Yeah, and my approver, yeah, would now need to evaluate this and then say, okay, that's fine. We want to have this wrapper that accesses the BAPI and the proof. So that concludes my demo.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kai. That looks very good. So if you want, you can let me share again just for the wrap up.
Yes.
All right. Then I will quickly share. Okay, so now I think we have shown you both the theory and how everything works in practice. So if you want to have further information on everything that we presented, please have a look at our blog posts that describe both the guidelines and also a tutorial regarding building wrappers. And of course, we have everything documented perfectly, first in a document where all the guidelines are explained. And then there is really a tutorial that you can work through step by step to do basically exactly the same what Kai now did in this session. And with that, from our point of view, we are finished. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you had great fun at the Devtoberfest and have fun with the upcoming sessions. If you have any queries, just let us know. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alexander and Kai, for this wonderful session. It was quite insightful. Now, note to all our attendees, in order to earn points and move up in the Devtoberfest game board, you may want to complete this tutorial that is attached to the chat as well as in the description box of this particular session. It will be updated soon after the session ends. So thank you thanks to everyone for attending this session, and see you all in the next session. Thank you. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.